So this is our third video for 3A, and we're going to talk about absolute and relative change. So some problems will come right out and ask you for the absolute or relative change or difference, and some won't. Some will use other phrases to let you know that that's what they're after. So what is the absolute and relative change officially and difference? Now, technically, change is over time and difference is from one similar object to the other, but I like to simplify these and put them together because if you understand how to find a reference value, you're good to go. And then that's one last thing to remember. Well, this is what I like to think of. I like to think the absolute change, see the A, is the actual change. So I just subtract the two. So I take the comparative value, the value that we're talking about, and then I subtract the reference value. Your referenced value is going to be referenced by that percentage preposition, or it's going to be the older value. The relative difference or change is when I take the difference and I compare it to the original value. So to do that requires me to use a ratio. See that alliteration too? Absolute's actual, relative is ratio. So here's the official formula. We can either take the absolute difference or change, what we just found by subtracting and divide it by the reference value, or we can do that all in one big step if we want to, or we take, see this compared minus reference is what's in the numerator, and divide it by the reference. So let's do this example. We've seen this numbers before, but let's do it all fancy now. The price of a movie ticket increases from $10 to $12. What is the relative change? And what is the percent change? Let's change this to absolute. What is the absolute change and what is the percent change? So the absolute change is where I take the original value. The compared value. So that's 12. And I subtract the reference value. And so in this case, I know that 10 is the reference value because it is the original. It's the older one, and older is almost always the reference value if we're on a time frame. So the absolute change is $2. Notice the absolute change here is given in the same units as my original values. What about the percent change? Percent change is the relative change. So here I can use a fancy formula. I can use this one right here. This starts with compared value. The compared value is $12 minus the reference value, which is $10, divided by the reference value, which is $10. Then this will be multiplied by 100 because I will record it as a percentage. That may be a lot for you to put into your calculator. You may want to say this is actually just 2 divided by 10, which is 0.2, and then multiply 0.2 by 100 to get 20%. Okay, so here, these are both, like if I wanted to state this in a way that didn't really shock people, I'd be like, oh, ticket prices went up $2. If I wanted to grab some attention, I could say in a short time, they've increased 20%, right? And that seems much more dramatic for some reason, but they're really the same number. But percentages does depend on where we start. All right, let's do number 6. The main span of Bridge A, which is 2,100 feet, is what percentage shorter than the main span of Bridge B? I know what you're saying. This doesn't say find the absolute or relative change because I'm confident you can plug and chug using those formulas. What am I after here? Well, if they're asking the percent shorter than, I'm actually trying to calculate a percent, which is should be enough of a hint, and I am trying to talk about the way that it's changed. So percent change is relative change or relative difference. So I'm going to go ahead and practice finding absolute difference just for the fun of it, but what we're actually after here, our answer is going to be the relative difference. So absolute difference says I take the compared value and subtract the reference value, but there's not a new value and an old value, so which is which? Okay, so percent shorter than is referencing the main span of Bridge B. Since that is what's being referenced by the percent, like that comes after the percent statement, percent up, percent more than, percent whatever. It's the reference, which means this is the compared. And you're going to see this stated this a lot of the time, compared first and reference second, but don't bank on that. Bank on what's the percent statement referencing. All right. So if that's true, the absolute difference is 210 minus 430. And what happens when we take a big number from a little number? We get a negative number. So the absolute difference is actually a negative 220 feet. That's pretty big. But we need to find the relative difference so we can answer the percent shorter than part. So the relative difference is going to be, I can either do the whole subtraction again. So I can do 2100 minus 4300 divided by 4300, or I could take the shorter one, which says I take the difference I've already found, negative 2200, divide it by the referenced value, and we see that the 4300 is being referenced. Go ahead and multiply it by 100, so it's a percent. And this gives me 51.2%, really negative 51.2%. Now up here in the blank, I'm just going to write 51.2 because the shorter than takes care of the negative. I don't want to put a second negative in there. I just want to make sure people know once that this is smaller. Interestingly, if I were to find the percent of here, that would be 2100 divided by 4300, which would be 48.8%. This is of, this is not an answer. No, that's why it's in red. Not an answer, but notice then the percent of is one part and the percent less than is the other part. Remember, because less than tends to mean that I have subtracted them. We're going to practice this one more time with percents of percents. The big deal is right here. If I'm actually going to describe how things change between percents in the world of absolute change, when I subtract a percent for a percent, I'm going to express that as percentage points. Remember when we said we can't really always add with percentages? So the same rule is going to apply to subtraction. And so here we're going to make it clear that we've done that and kind of tweaked and pushed on the rules a little bit by using percentage points. You may have seen these in articles you've read. Sometimes they use the abbreviations PP and wondered why they wrote that instead of a percent sign. Now you know it's because it was an absolute change or an absolute difference. If you're finding the relative change with them, just like always, you're going to multiply by 100 and then it's going to be a percent. So you're going to use the percent sign or the word just percent. Let's work these. 1950, 75.5% of manufactured cars were made in the United States. By 2015, only 13.3% of cars were manufactured in the United States. So let's find the absolute change. So absolute change, remember, is just the actual difference. So I'm going to take the compared value and subtract the reference. Now, referenced tends to be the older value when our time frame. So that's the reference since it's from 1950, and this is compared since it's the earlier value. Okay, and you may want to flip back and look at your notes. When you have the two, we're going to put compared first, and we're going to subtract the older value. All right. So when you type that in your calculator, do not type the percent, right? You'll just make your calculator panic a little bit. Just type 13.3 minus 75.5, and we get negative 62.2. And here is worth lots of points right here on your test. Percentage points, or PP. Okay, I kind of makes me nervous to say PP out loud, even though you're college kids. But percentage points. So this is how I can show somebody what I've actually done is just subtract a percent from a percent. What about the relative change? Relative change requires me to take that difference, so 62.2, and divide it by the referenced value, which is 75.5. So I'm going to take that. At first it's going to give me a decimal, and then I'm going to multiply it by 100 and get the percent, which is 82.38%. It's actually negative. But let's complete the statements. The percent of cars manufactured in the U.S. decreased by blank percentage points. So this one comes from absolute, gives me percentage points, or 82.38%. Notice I didn't put the negatives in any of those because it's covered by decreased, but be careful if they don't use decreased and you have a negative. We do have to make sure that that is clear somehow. Again, the difference in the two can just lead, we might choose between one or the other just to get more of the emotional reaction from people. Like, this doesn't seem as bad if that's what you're after. This seems worse if that's what you're after. So, I'm not promising you that everybody that writes an article is trying to grab your emotional connection, but a good writer is probably thinking through that. So, you're ready to finish? 3A, okay? Be very careful that you're paying attention and reading the problems. Am I finding the difference? Am I finding the percent change? Am I finding percent of? Am I finding values? They're all there, and you can do all of them and try to see how they're connected to each other as you